For some, paying a $25 fine for speeding would be literally a slap on the fingers at best. But for somebody living below the poverty line, a $50 fine could be catastrophic. It could cost them calories.
If a billionaire and a minimum wage worker are both independently caught driving above the speed limit, should they pay the same fine, or should it be adjusted to their wealth? In some countries, fines change according to income, but so far, US cities have been reluctant to try it out. Are they leaving money on the table? Welcome to the Chicago Booth Review podcast, where we bring you groundbreaking academic research in a clear and straightforward way. I'm Hal Weitzman. In 2021, Jean-Pierre Dube wrote an award-winning essay for Chicago Booth Review entitled "Lower Fines Could Lead to Higher Revenues." Dube, a Booth marketing professor and pricing expert, points out that standardized fees are regressive, hurting the poorest most, causing delinquency and often exacerbating their situation. He also notes that uniform fines don't act as a deterrent for the wealthy. And he says that personalizing fines could bring in more money for cities at a time when they are increasingly depending on revenue from fees to balance their budgets. So why are US cities so reluctant to do it? Jean-Pierre Dube, welcome to the Chicago Booth Review podcast.
Thank you very much.
We're delighted to have you on because we wanted to follow up several years after you wrote this terrific award-winning piece for us entitled "Lower Fines Could Lead to Higher Revenues," about the benefits of personalized fines and how they would help cities and taxpayers. So just remind us, for those of us who haven't read the article for a while, what's wrong with the current system? What's wrong with charging people the same cost, same price for a fine?
Sure. Well, it really gets to the heart of how we think of what's fair. I think that the working logic by most is that a fair pricing scheme would be one where everyone gets charged exactly the same amount, whether that's for a service or a benefit, or in this case, a penalty for something you're not supposed to do. But what we forget is that sometimes when we charge one single uniform price for all, that may exclude certain parts of the population from being able to pay. In the case of goods and services, that may deprive some people from getting served the benefits of those services. In the case of city penalties, for some, paying a $25 fine for speeding would be literally a slap on the fingers at best. In fact, in some cases, if your income is really high, it might almost feel like a right, just paying for the right to speed. But for somebody living below the poverty line, paycheck to paycheck, a $25 fine or a $50 fine could be catastrophic. It could cost them calories.
And I know you've got some data that you can share with us about the real effects of those fines and delinquent fines that lead to fees and everything else. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's sort of another factor to think about here is that the city of Chicago, just for instance, has been struggling for decades with its municipal debt and its municipal shortfall. And one of the seemingly easiest ways to raise more money in the short term is, well, let's just raise prices. There's sort of this view that price increases are a free option. And so we've seen over the last decade or more lots of examples of how the city just sort of raised prices without any kind of evidence that this would genuinely increase revenues. The thinking is, if I raise everything from speeding tickets to penalties for unpaid, vehicle registrations and so forth, unpaid parking tickets, that the combination of the amount for the fine and the amounts charged for penalties when those fines aren't paid, if everyone complies with that, then you make more money. That's the way the city thinks of revenue. Of course, in economics and in real-world business, the word revenue means money coming back. It doesn't mean aspirational, and the law of demand prevails. So
you're saying that there's a proportion of people who just will not pay the cost of the fine, so there's some proportion of the revenue that will never come in.
Absolutely. If you raise the price of a speeding ticket, it's just going to put more people at a disadvantage, and it's going to increase municipal debt. There's going to be unpaid fines. That's exactly what we saw in the last 10 years. I mean, just as for example, one of the many prices Rahm Emanuel raised.
And that's Rahm Emanuel was the former mayor of Chicago 2 mayors ago.
2 mayors ago, former mayor Rahm Emanuel felt that he could generate $16 million in incremental revenues per year just by increasing the penalty for not paying your vehicle registration fee from $120 to $200. But this, of course, this projection relies on the assumption that everyone will keep paying, that it would not be possible for someone to continue driving their car and simply just not pay for their vehicle registration. And of course, that's not at all what happened. We saw an increase in violations. In fact, just as an example, in 2017, 10,000 people who filed Chapter 13 personal bankruptcy in the city of Chicago cited unpaid city tickets, parking tickets, and these other kinds of fines. Only 1,000 people filing Chapter 13 bankruptcy in 2007 cited tickets. So you can see before and after these price increases, not only was there, by the way, an increase in personal bankruptcies, but the proportion of those where tickets were paying a non-trivial role went up dramatically.
Are you actually saying that tickets can be one of the contributory factors to bankruptcy?
Oh, absolutely. For a low-income household, failure to pay a ticket can land you a whole bunch of additional penalties over the next few months. They can sometimes more than double the amount of the original fine. So somebody who's delinquent for a couple of years, you might lose your driver's license, which means now you can't go to work. You lose your job. And there was a study that showed that unemployment rates went up in a statistically significant way in Chicago before versus after the increases in these fines in those areas where you saw higher rates of delinquency. Eventually, you can actually go to court, and sometimes you couldn't face short-term incarceration. You could go to jail for 4 or 5 days due to unpaid fines and fees. For whatever it's worth, in 2019, Chicago traffic fines, which when unpaid tend to go to collection agencies, 90% of the unpaid fees or fines, accounts that were sent to a collection agency, were concentrated in 20 zip codes in the Chicago area, which are predominantly populated by Black Americans and Hispanics. So this is also a very serious social injustice problem, that not charging differentially and subjecting everyone not only to a uniform rate, but to a uniform rate that keeps going up year over year for no logical reason, is disproportionately hurting those who are already economically and sociologically disadvantaged.
So not only is it bad accounting, because the city of Chicago is calling it revenue when it's actually not revenue at all, or some of it isn't, but it's also hurting the people who you might think a system that was designed to be fair would benefit from.
Yes, pretty ironic when you consider Rahm Emanuel's positioning as wanting to pursue social justice. Lori Lightfoot, for example.
She was the successor to Rahm Emanuel.
Successor to Rahm Emanuel lowered the bar for speeding cameras, so that whereas previously you got a $35 fine for being 10 miles an hour over the limit, she lowered it to 6 to 9 miles per hour for that $35 threshold. Again, the thinking being, hey, free money for the city. And when we look at the people who are disproportionately getting taxed with amounts they can't afford to pay, it tends to be in disadvantaged neighborhoods.
So on the one hand, you have a succession of mayors who've come in saying they want a more equitable city. On the other hand, you have increasing fees which are more and more inequitable in how they affect people. So this is so interesting, because personalized fines, I guess one of the reactions, the gut reactions that many of us would have is, that just seems unfair. Why should I pay more than my neighbor because I earn more or whatever? But the effect is really the opposite, that if you wanted an equitable treatment, you would charge people different fines.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if we had somebody from the city finance with us, they would immediately remind us of a very important detail, and that is you're not supposed to speed. You are supposed to have a vehicle registration fee, and that the purpose of these fines is to deter people from not complying with the law. And I don't think at any point are we in disagreement that we don't want people to feel that because they're financially needy, they shouldn't comply with the law. Your income shouldn't be a factor in whether or not you have to obey the law. But the point is, what's a deterrent? For somebody who's making $500,000 a year, a $25 fine is not really a deterrent. But for somebody who makes $15,000 a year, a $25 fine could be like excessive.
Okay, so I know in some European countries have experimented with, very, very high fines for people who are for the uber wealthy, and certainly we have some uber wealthy people in Chicago, and I'm sure on occasion they speed. How would a system work in the US? I mean, how would it be up to cities just to draw the line on income and then say above this level, if you speed above this speed, then this is the fine? And how high do you think they could go?
Well, that would be one way to do it. And what you're suggesting is a genuinely progressive fine scheme, which is based on your income. That's what they do in Switzerland. So in Switzerland, the amount that you pay for a speeding ticket is proportional to your income. So there's a famous story in 2010. A Ferrari Testarossa got caught doing 137 kilometers per hour in St. Gallen, where there was an 80 kilometer per hour limit, and the driver was charged a penalty of 290,000 US dollars. So again, we're talking about somebody who is extremely wealthy. $290,000 got to hurt even in that case. But again, this was newsworthy because of the magnitude. But somebody who's earning $15,000 a year would pay a dramatically smaller amount. And the idea is we want somebody who's going way over the speed limit. We want them to be deterred from that kind of speeding. But clearly, the amount of money that becomes an effective deterrent versus the amount of money where it becomes like excessive and cruel and unusually punishment is going to vary with your ability to pay.
So at the lower end, would it be that people didn't get a fine at all, or they had a nominal fine?
There would be for the average person, you would call this a nominal fine. But again, the word nominal is all relative.
Sure. But I mean, you're talking in other words, there could be people who are fined a few dollars, and there could be people who are fined $500.
Yeah, or people who are charged $10,000.
Okay, so the idea then is that this could be more equitable. Could it also raise more money for cities? Because that was kind of the point of your piece.
Absolutely. Well, now we're getting to the heart of the economics. The missing ingredient in city logic is the law of demand. And we know from countless papers, countless articles, and countless field studies of the business world, at least, that there's a demand curve and that payers are more likely to pay. They're more likely to buy as prices go down. They're less likely to buy as prices go up. And the same basic economic logic is going to hold when it comes to fines, that at some point, your ability to pay is going to be at stake as mayors like former Mayor Emanuel or former Mayor Lightfoot just indiscriminately raise the uniform price. And that's exactly what we observed. To put it in economic terms, there's elasticity in a person's propensity to pay. And as the price goes up, I eventually either can't pay or I just say, this is so much money, I'm not going to pay it. I just refuse. I mean, it's going to cannibalize other things I do. And even though it's against the law and I'm supposed to pay, I'm just not going to pay.
But your idea is that delinquency, the number of people who are not paying their fines, would go down. Absolutely. If we had a more graduated system like we discussed.
That's exactly right. And since we've already seen that as fine rates go up and down across cities, that propensity to pay goes up and down, compliance with payment goes up and down, we already know that elasticity exists anyhow. But what economics would say is, well, if I'm trying to get people to pay the right amounts, and some people are going to stop paying at lower prices than others, personalizing is a way of fine-tuning everybody's payment propensity. And it's true. Somebody at the low end of the scale might be charged only a nominal amount, but if I collect $10 from somebody, that's more actual revenue than if I fine them $50 and collect zero.
Right, particularly if they'll pay $10 without lots of reminders and court action and everything else that costs money.
No, now you're really getting to the key of this point, which is we're not even thinking about all of the costs to the city of court dates, fines, reminders, petitions. I mean, when somebody goes to court to petition forgiveness on their fine based on their means, this requires scheduling a court date. It requires a judge to deliberate on. This is extremely costly to the city. And meanwhile, it's just more time elapsing where rather than collecting money, the city is actually expending resources to provide all of that infrastructure to petition and rethink the fine. The irony of all of this, by the way, is at the end of the day, we do have personalized fines in the city of Chicago, but it can require months or even a year, and each individual going in front of a judge and letting the judge use their gut instinct to make a determination of whether to forgive the fine and how much to forgive. Now, that's not called personalization because you were technically charged the full rack rate, and ex post, you might be eligible to get some forgiveness. when I talk about personalized fines, my point is, why not use data and do this from the get-go? Why not just charge the right prices up front, save the city a fortune in administrating all of the unpaid debt, and meanwhile we collect the money?
If you're enjoying this podcast, there's another University of Chicago Podcast Network show that you should check out. It's called Not Another Politics Podcast. Not Another Politics Podcast provides a fresh perspective on the biggest political stories, not through opinions and anecdotes, but through rigorous scholarship, massive data sets, and a deep knowledge of theory. If you want to understand the political science behind the political headlines, then listen to Not Another Politics Podcast, part of the University of Chicago Podcast Network. So when you wrote that piece for us, JP, you said in it, you were looking for a city to experiment with because you need the data to construct these models of what fines are effective. And I know there's a big psychological barrier in cities saying, yes, we'll do it, yes, we'll experiment. Did you find a city to experiment with?
We did, but it took several years, partially because of the chicken and egg problem, that most cities said they're interested in doing something like this, but first they want to see proof that it works. And so, of course, if nobody's city wants to be the lead city, then we're never going to find anyone who's willing to do it. I mean, it almost seems like if one city does it and it works, then there's going to be it's going to literally open the floodgates. That's my prediction. There are some other psychological barriers here, but that one's just the perceived risk, is there's just some cities that have been unpersuadable because for them, the definition of revenue is the projections they put on their books, which are based on an assumption that 100% of people will pay what they're charged. And the reality where you have hundreds of millions of unpaid debt is not considered. For them, that's not the right benchmark against which to work. So if I personalize prices, I'm going to be charging some people less. For them, that's less revenue. It's, of course, if we use the correct definition of revenue, it can be more revenue because somebody paying a smaller amount is better than somebody not paying anything on a higher amount.
Well, even if they model people paying $10,000 fines.
Well, I'm perhaps not the best negotiator with the city, which is why someone else is handling most of those meetings. But I once made that joke flippantly, and that was a city I haven't been very successful at partnering with. But that's exactly what I said.
So there's an accounting problem, and then there's a kind of a psychological problem, which is you first. I'm just wondering if there's still the fairness issue.
Well, that's a slightly different thing, although I think we've worked over the fairness thing. Technically speaking, it's against the law in the United States to charge people different fine amounts. But that's actually not so far removed from a grocery supermarket chain. The management of supermarket chain telling you, yeah, consumers would find it hopelessly unfair if we charged everyone different prices, right? But when we're talking about the fairness issue, that's about the actual ticket price, the sticker price. What seems to be a lot more fair is a world where you charge everyone the same price, and then ex post, people get coupons, and who gets a coupon and the face value of the coupon is then determined based on data of some sort. That's considered more fair.
Well, that would certainly be a deterrent if you got a $10,000 fine. Even if you got a $9,000 900 coupon, it would still be presumably a significant deterrent. So tell us a little bit, as much as you're able to. I know you don't want to share the name of the city that you're working with, but tell us about where you are going to experiment, and hopefully the floodgates will open.
Well, we're very hopeful. We're literally on the verge, meaning we're a month away now from launching our experiment. We're working with a water utility in a large western city in the United States. The plan is to take about 20,000 households in this large city, and for the course of three months, which is since many people have quarterly billing for their water, is approximately a payment cycle. The 20,000 households are each going to receive randomized coupons. And what that means is over that 3-month period, the household will obtain X% off of the regular price for their water. So there's a uniform price per cubic foot of water. And depending on the coupon you'll get some percentage discount off that regular price for that 3-month period. And we'll have a control group of households who will get 0% off and will continue to pay the full price.
And so in that case, would you be putting the price of the cost of water up, the standard price?
So we're not. It's interesting you asked that question, because even with businesses, I've had a very hard time persuading many businesses to test higher prices. Testing lower prices with coupons, fine, but higher prices, they're not so much of a willingness. But what's been happening now, we're a couple of years out of COVID and lockdown, many cities are in the process of raising their regular prices of water now. And so this will coincide with a fairly substantial increase in the regular price of water, which will give us a little more information then. So we're going to be starting with a higher base price, and then people will get discounts off of that higher base price.
So some won't get any discount, some will get hefty discount. That's based on where they live?
It's going to be randomized.
Oh, you randomize. Okay.
Yeah, this is a real experiment because this is the problem. We're trying to learn what kind of household features are predictive of who can pay and who can't pay. And naturally, income would be one thing, but there are other socio-demographic factors, not to mention your payment history. And we're going to try and see if we can use the same kind of information that would be available to a judge, granted many months later for somebody who's already hopelessly delinquent and racked up a ton of debt. We're going to try and see if ex ante, using the same kind of information as might be available to a judge eventually, if we can build an objective platform that will decide what amount of the price might be forgiven. And incidentally, unlike a human being, even a qualified expert judge, the software will be consistent. There's no changes in opinion or whatever, or hidden biases. It will always use the same rules.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is the way you're talking about coupons and having standardized prices is going to remind a lot of people of shopping. Mm-hmm. And you talked, we had some piece in CBI years ago about your research on personalized pricing. We are, in certain circumstances, prepared to accept different prices, right? It's the summer vacation in the Northern Hemisphere is coming up. Many of us will be going on vacation. We will have paid very different prices than the person we're sitting next to on the plane or the person in the hotel room next door to us. But we accept that. Why do you think there's that difference there?
Are you sure?
Well, maybe not. Tell me, is there resistance to that?
I've been baffled by some of what we've seen in the media in the last couple of years when it comes to personalization. You're absolutely right. If I want to go on a vacation, the amount I pay depends on when I go. Right, so the prices do vary during the course of the year for a hotel in Florida. If I want to go in spring break, I'm going to pay a lot more than if I go in April or if I go in February. So we know the prices vary over time, and clearly across people. For some people, it's impossible to go at those off-peak periods, and they can only travel at spring break. So you'd think, hey, this seems really unfair too, but somehow it's normal and we've accepted that. But meanwhile, when Wendy's merely proposed that they might use that kind of dynamic pricing, it didn't just cause a public outrage. I mean, we had our elected officials started calling out Wendy's and challenging their ethics. And last time I checked, I mean, hamburgers are not a required thing. This is not a necessity. This is not like, using dynamic pricing on hand sanitizers in COVID, right? Or in gasoline prices during a weather crisis, right? This is hamburgers. But somehow it's okay to do dynamic pricing on trips, but elected officials are calling out the ethics of dynamic pricing on hamburgers.
Well, why do you think that is? Because many of us will use Uber. We know that the price of Uber changes minute by minute. But there's not a big revolution against Uber based on pricing anyway. So why do you think it is that we're prepared on some cases, but not, as you say, when it comes to things like food? Or even if you go into the store and you say the nominal price is the same, you know what you're going to pay for the jacket.
People are triggered by change. And we're in an era now for it's sort of sad, I suppose, but we're in an era where any time a business makes money, the assumption is that somehow this is a zero-sum game and that this must be at the expense of the customer. But, coming back to the world of personalization, those experiments that you referred to, not the ones with the city, but the ones I did with businesses, what we routinely found was that when we personalize prices, the average price that someone gets charged is lower than the uniform price we would have charged in a world where everyone pays the same. What that means is that the average person is paying less. There are some people who will pay more, and it does act a little bit like a progressive tax scheme. Some people will pay more, but that doesn't mean that consumers as a whole are put at a disadvantage. Not only is it possible that the majority of people could pay less, but most importantly, the people who are paying less might be those who are the most disadvantaged in the first place, the kinds of folks who you'd want to help and give a better shot at getting access to goods and services.
Remind us of the experiment that you conducted about pricing with a recruiting company.
Yes, I worked with a digital platform. We ran an experiment for a month where about 8,000 of their customers who hit their paywall were charged a randomized price. Their regular price was a subscription price of $99 a month, but we tested prices as low as $19 a month and as high as $399 a month. Just to step outside of that experiment for a moment, imagine if Tropicana orange juice was regularly charging $6 a gallon for their not from concentrate premium juice, and as a part of a price test, experimented with a temporary test price of as much as $20. That's kind of what that experiment did. And we use those data, as we're going to do with this water utility we were discussing earlier, to train a machine learning algorithm to determine what features of customers, these are customer attributes, if you will, are associated with their willingness to pay. And we then ran a second experiment with a whole new batch of customers, thousands of them, and we did a horse race between getting the uniform optimal price versus getting the price that the algorithm would charge you based on your customer features. And there we found that more than 60% of the customers paid less under personalization than they would have paid under a uniform price, which means that we not only were the average person much better off, actually the median person was much better off, but on top of that, which means the majority are better off, but on top of that, we increased access.
Right. So, but there's a postscript to that story. What happened? Did they, after you stopped the experiment with the company, they abandoned the system, right?
Competition. They were afraid as competitors entered, but the postscript is a little more nuanced than that.
There's a PPS
because what they did do was raise their price.
Okay.
They raised their price,
but for everyone.
For everyone, they were massively undercharging. But the personalization, they go, if we do personalization, this gets out in the public domain, it'll be a PR nightmare. Which is ironic because under personalization, they would make more money, but more customers would get served, and the majority of customers would pay less. Why that would be perceived as less fair, I find strange, but that is the reality of where we are today.
Okay, so it sounds like the psychological barrier on the fairness could be overcome with the use of discounts, right? If everyone has the same nominal price, but some people get bigger discounts than others, we're more likely to accept it than if the nominal prices are different, as in the case that you described.
It sounds silly because the net effect is exactly the same. I'm not sure why it makes any difference. Maybe this is a loophole to work around certain laws, at least in the case of municipal services. But that seems to be the case. I mean, supermarkets already do this. I mean, many online businesses already do this. You get coupons emailed to you on a regular basis. Those aren't always sent out to the entire population.
Right. Okay. So if we're going to get to this future of personalized pricing and personalized fees, it might be that it looks like everybody pays a standard price, but in reality, we're all paying different prices.
That's a possibility. On net, we pay different prices, even though the sticker price was the same for everyone.
Well, JP, thank you so much for coming on the Chicago Booth Review podcast. It's been a great conversation.
My pleasure.
That's it for this episode of the Chicago Booth Review podcast, part of the University of Chicago Podcast Network. For more research, analysis, and insights, visit our website at chicagobooth.edu/review. When you're there, sign up for our weekly newsletter so you never miss the latest in business-focused academic research. This episode was produced by Josh Stunkel. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and please do leave us a 5-star review. Until next time, I'm Hal Weitzman. Thanks for listening.